The Vietnam War was one of the most brutal and intense conflicts in modern history, marked by relentless combat, deadly ambushes, and a dense jungle that seemed to swallow those who dared to venture inside. American soldiers and their allies faced not only a highly adaptable enemy, but also a treacherous environment filled with natural dangers and chilling stories that defy logic to this day. At the heart of this war, elite units like the MAC VSOG Green Berets, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, and the U.S. Army Rangers were deployed on classified missions to infiltrate, sabotage, and hunt down Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army, NVA, forces. Operating deep behind enemy lines, these men were trained to survive under the most extreme conditions, but no amount of training could have prepared them for what lurked in the darkness of the Vietnamese jungle. The Vietnamese jungle was a living labyrinth, a place where the suffocating humidity, dense vegetation, and unfamiliar sounds created an atmosphere of constant paranoia. Soldiers frequently reported feeling watched, as if something unseen was hunting them. Nights were filled with inexplicable noises, shadows shifting in the darkness, and creatures that didn't match any known records of local wildlife. Stories of dark figures, glowing eyes peering from the foliage, and metallic sounds echoing through the trees have been told by veterans who could never forget what they experienced. Some believe these were just hallucinations, the result of extreme combat stress and exhaustion. Others, however, swear that something inhuman was stalking them in the darkness. I'm not exactly sure when we first started feeling that something was wrong. Maybe it was right after the crash, or maybe it was before. That eerie feeling every soldier gets when they know something bad is about to happen. The helicopter went down too fast. A blast, a flash, and suddenly we were plummeting like a rock. The pilot shouted something, but I never caught it before we slammed into the ground so hard I thought I'd black out. But I didn't. We survived. All 5 of us. Carter and I were the first to crawl out of the wreckage of the UH-1. The air reeked of burning oil, thick smoke rising into the dark canopy of the Vietnamese jungle. Hawkins had a bleeding arm, but it wasn't serious. Ramirez had a twisted ankle. Kowalski was fine. Our radio, dead. The chopper, useless. We were stranded in the middle of nowhere, cut off from any contact. And we all knew one thing for sure. If we stayed put, the Viet Cong would find us before our own people did. So we started moving. The Vietnamese jungle doesn't just surround you, it swallows you whole. The heat was suffocating, the air thick like it had weight. Sweat was already dripping down my face before we had even walked 10 minutes. The buzzing insects were deafening, mixed with the occasional distant cries of monkeys and birds echoing through the trees. The canopy was so dense that the sunlight barely made it through, but that was all normal. What wasn't normal was the silence. At first I didn't even notice, but at some point, everything stopped. The insects, the birds, the monkeys. Nothing. Not even the sound of the wind through the trees. That never happens in the jungle. Never. You guys hear that? Kowalski asked, his voice low, tense. Hear what? Carter replied. Exactly. That's when I realized it too. The silence was absolute. The kind that shouldn't exist in nature. The kind that makes your stomach turn and tightens your throat. Ramirez glanced around, his eyes wide. This isn't right. And he was right, but we couldn't stop. We picked up the pace, moving faster now. Kowalski gripped his M16 tightly, scanning the thick vegetation. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my chest, sweat soaking through my shirt. The silence stretched on, and every step felt too heavy, like the jungle itself was waiting for something. That's when we heard it. A sharp, metallic sound. Click, click, click. No. One moved, click, click, click. It was faint but close, too close. Hawkins squinted, trying to pinpoint the source. What the hell is that? No one answered. Because in that moment, we were all thinking the same thing. That wasn't a sound the Sak jungle was supposed to make. And whatever it was right there with us. The first night in the jungle is always rough, but this one was different. After hours of walking, we found a small clearing between the trees, just big enough to set up for the night. The ground was damp, reeking of rotting earth and decaying vegetation. Ramirez and Kowalski set up a basic perimeter with branches and leaves. Not much, just enough to give us some warning if something, or someone, got too close. Carter assigned watch shifts. I took the first one. We were starving, but no one wanted to eat. We were exhausted, but no one wanted to sleep, and the silence was still there. It was like the jungle had died. No crickets, no nightbirds, nothing. The only sounds were our own breathing and the occasional rustling of gear when someone shifted. And then, it happened again. Click, click, click. I stopped chewing what was left of my ration bar and froze. The sound wasn't far away this time. It was close, somewhere between the trees hidden in the darkness. Ramirez heard it too. He sat on the ground, looking up at me without saying a word. His expression said everything. It was just a branch snapping. Carter muttered, but he didn't sound convinced. He wanted to believe that. Click, click, click. That wasn't a branch, I murmured. Hawkins slowly stood up, tightening his grip on his M16. What the hell makes a sound like that? I wanted to answer. I wanted to say it was some kind of insect or a bird, anything normal. But the truth was, there was no explanation. That sound didn't belong in the jungle. Ramirez made the sign of the cross with his fingers. That's not an animal. That's not human, Kowalski scoffed. Man, you always come up with this bullshit. Then tell me what the hell it is, Ramirez shot back. Because I'm telling you right now, this ain't normal. Carter sighed. He was the oldest, the most experienced. He didn't want to admit that he was scared. Forget it, stay on watch. We moved for the river at first light, get some rest. But nobody rested. I stayed awake for way too long, staring into the pitch-black void between the trees. The sound never came back, but the feeling of being watched never left. At some point, my body gave in, and I dozed off for a few minutes. When I opened my eyes, Hawkins was nudging me. What? I muttered. He didn't answer right away. He just pointed to the ground. I blinked a few times, trying to understand what he was showing me. Footprints, not ours. They were all around the camp, and whatever had made them had been standing there while we slept. I woke up with a bitter taste in my mouth and the overwhelming feeling that something was wrong. Not that this was new. Ever since that helicopter went down, nothing felt right. But when I saw the looks on the others' faces, I knew it wasn't. Just in my head, Thompson was crouched near the edge of camp, running his fingers through the soft earth. Hawkins stood behind him, gripping his rifle too tightly. Ramirez had his arms crossed, brow furrowed, as if he was trying to pretend he wasn't seeing what was right in front of us. Carter walked up and squatted down next to them. What the hell is this? I stepped closer and my stomach twisted. Footprints, but not normal ones. They were too big to be human. 4 long, clawed imprints, dug deep into the mud. But they weren't from a bear, not a tiger. And they sure as hell weren't ours. What leaves tracks like that? Kowalski asked, his voice tight. No one answered. Thompson, always the one trying to keep a level head, let out a slow breath. Could be some kind of Viet Cong trick. Maybe fake tracks to mess with us. Hawkins shook his head. No, this isn't. Viet Cong, how do you know? He pointed around us. Look closely, no drag marks, no human footprints nearby. If this was a trap, someone had to come out here to set it up, right? But all we see is this. Silence. He was right. When the Viet Cong pulled psychological warfare, they always left something behind. Tracks, markers, anything to lure us in. But here, nothing. Just these massive footprints. No signs of movement, no broken branches, no human presence. So what the hell made these? Ramirez asked, almost whispering. I stared into the jungle, every shadow between the trees seeming to move on its own. One thing was certain. This wasn't an accident. Hawkins stood up, scanning the tree line. Whatever made these, it was circling us. Kowalski muttered a curse and swallowed hard. None of us wanted to say it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. It had been here while we slept. Carter stood up, brushing dirt off his pants. We're leaving, now. No one argued. Within 10 minutes, we had torn down what little of the camp we could and were already moving, rifles held tighter than the night before. As we walked away, I stole one last glance over my shoulder. The footprints were still there, deep in the mud, and then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. They weren't leading away. They were getting closer. The heat was unbearable. Every step sank into the mud, every breath felt heavy. The humidity soaked our clothes and the stench of rotting vegetation clung to our skin. But none of that was as disturbing as the feeling. We were being watched. Wasn't paranoia. It wasn't irrational fear. It was real. The kind of thing you feel in your bones before your mind even catches up. Since we left the campsite, the silence had followed us. No animals, no movement in the vegetation. Just the sound of our boots sinking into wet earth and the occasional click of rifles being repositioned. We were moving fast, trying to get out of that part of the jungle as soon as possible. But no matter how far we went, the feeling of being followed never left. And then it happened. It was quick, a flash between the trees. I froze instantly, raising my fist to signal the others. Carter and Hawkins did the same. Whatever it was close. "You saw that?" Kowalski murmured. "Yeah, we all saw it. It was like a faint shimmer, a distorted reflection. Like the air itself was bending around something. Something big. Something that shouldn't be there. Could be sunlight bouncing off the leaves," Thompson said. But even he didn't sound convinced. Ramirez gripped his rifle tighter. "What kind of reflection moves?" Nobody answered. Then we saw it again. Something shifted between the trees. But it wasn't an animal. It wasn't a man. It was a shadow of nothingness, a walking distortion. Like the space around it was warping, trying to conceal something that shouldn't exist. And then Bishop lost it. He yelled something and pulled the trigger. The gunfire exploded through the jungle. Birds scattered into the sky. The echo of the shots rippled through the trees. But Bishop kept firing, his eyes wide with terror, as if he was staring at a demon standing right in front of him. Carter lunged at him, slamming him against a tree. "Cut that shit out, Bishop!" Bishop was panting, his chest rising and falling rapidly. But what really made my blood run cold was what he said next. "I saw it, Carter. It was looking at us." A chill ran down my spine. He wasn't lying. Hawkins scanned the jungle, his finger steady on the trigger. But there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches. Nothing but the dense, suffocating jungle pressing in around us. But we all knew it was still there. And for the first time, we understood. The jungle no longer belonged to us, we belonged to it. The jungle was breaking us. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't exhaustion. It was something worse. Uncertainty. After what Bishop did, no one could ignore it anymore. We weren't just lost. We were being hunted. And whatever the hell it was, it didn't want to kill us. At least not yet. It was playing with us. Testing us. Carter wanted to keep up the pace, but it was starting to wear on him. His eyes were sunken, his movements slower, his voice quieter. Ramirez was on edge. He fiddled with his rifle every 5 seconds, kept looking over his shoulder like he was expecting to see something right behind him. "This isn't normal," he whispered. "This isn't normal." "You've said that like 10 times, Kowalski muttered. "Quit acting like a damn lunatic." "I'm crazy? And you think this is normal?" Ramirez gestured wildly around us. "The silence, the weird sounds, that thing Bishop saw. None of this is normal." Kowalski let out a sharp breath. "Maybe if you'd stop freaking out, we could actually think of a way out of this." The two of them locked eyes, tense like they were about to start swinging. Hawkins sat off to the side, cleaning his rifle, ignoring the argument. Since that morning, he had barely spoken, just watching. I walked up to him. "You good?" He blinked like he had forgotten I was there. Then he looked up at me. "You know what I think?" "What?" Hawkins took a deep breath. "This isn't about us." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He exhaled slowly. "This isn't an ambush. This isn't an attack. None of us are dead. None of us are hurt. This thing..." He hesitated. "It's waiting." watching to see how long we last. Chill ran through me, because deep down I knew he was right. Carter finally snapped. He shoved Ramirez and Kowalski apart. Enough of this shit. We're tired, we're screwed, but losing our heads isn't gonna help. He wiped a hand over his sweaty face. We keep moving, now! No one argued. Truth was, we wanted to keep moving. Stopping felt worse, so we marched on. The jungle felt thicker, the heat more suffocating, and for some reason, with every step, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were going exactly where it wanted us to go. The smell hit us before we saw anything. That stench of old flesh, of dried blood mixed with damp earth. Strong enough to turn your stomach, but not fresh. The air was thick, heavy. None of us spoke as we moved, our footsteps muffled by the mud and rotting leaves. Then through the trees, we saw it, a camp or what was left of one. The tents were shredded, equipment scattered like a storm had torn through the place. There were rifles, rations, open ammo crates, even sealed food cans, but no people, no signs of life, no bodies. Kowalski took a slow breath, gripping his rifle tight. This doesn't feel right. Hawkins stepped forward, nudging an open backpack with his boot. Inside, clothes, a flipped-over canteen, some water-damaged photos of Viet Cong soldiers smiling for the camera. The photos were ripped, a knot formed in my stomach. It was like someone had raided this place, took what they wanted, and then erased the people. Kowalski kicked a dented metal flask and turned to Carter. Looks like they left in a hurry. Hawkins scanned the camp, shaking his head. No, nobody left. He turned to us. They were taken. I crouched near a pile of AK-47s. The magazines were still loaded. Some were caked in mud like they had been dropped carelessly. Thompson pointed to a nearby tree. There's blood here. We all turned. Yes, blood, a lot of it. Splattered on the trunk, soaked into the leaves, pooling on the ground. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was above. Up high on the thicker branches, ropes hung down. Many of them. Some still had shredded bits of fabric caught in the knots, like someone had hung things there, and then removed them. Ramirez's throat went dry. Bodies. Or trophies, Hawkins muttered. And then I saw it. Something that made my blood run cold. The ground near the tents had been disturbed, like something had been dug up. I moved closer, my heart hammering. They weren't graves. They were shallow depressions, carved into the dirt, like something big had lain there or waited there. This is wrong, I whispered. I swallowed hard, scanning the twisted scene around me. Nothing made sense. If this had been a Viet Cong ambush, there would be bullet holes everywhere, shattered trees, scorch marks from grenades, but there were none. No bullet casings, no signs of a battle, nothing. This wasn't a fight, this was a hunt. Kowalski grabbed a canteen left near one of the barracks. It was still full. He looked to Carter. What now? Carter took a long moment before answering. His eyes scanned the wreckage, trying to find logic in something that had none. Finally, he said the only thing that made sense. We leave. Now. No one argued. We turned and kept moving, but the silence felt even heavier now, because for the first time, it wasn't just a feeling anymore. It wasn't paranoia. We had proof. This thing wasn't just following us, it had done this before and it knew exactly what it was doing. We walked for hours, maybe more. Time had lost its meaning. The jungle around us never changed. It was always the same suffocating landscape. Towering trees, dense vegetation, the ground covered in mud and twisted roots. The humidity clung to our skin, thick like a wet blanket. Every step felt heavy. Every shadow seemed to move when no one was looking. But the worst part came when we finally realized it. We were walking in circles. This isn't possible, Thompson murmured, staring at the map. His hands trembled as he held it, his eyes scanning the markings like he was expecting them to change on their own. But it wasn't the map that was wrong, it was the jungle. We're heading in the right direction, Kowalski insisted. I've been marking the trees as we go, but... He pointed. And there, Carved into the bark of a massive fig tree was an X cut with a knife. The same X he had marked almost an hour ago. The silence between us was absolute. "This isn't navigation error. This isn't coincidence," Ramirez said, his voice low and tense. "This is that thing messing with us." Thompson gripped his rifle. "Cut the crap, we're tired, lost, but there's nothing following us." "Nothing?" Ramirez stepped closer, his eyes wild. "Then explain the footprints, explain the sound. Explain what Bishop saw. Explain why no matter where we go, we always end up in the same damn place." No one had an answer. Carter took a deep breath and pulled out the compass. "Let's just get our bearings again. Stay calm." He turned the compass. The needle spun wildly. No direction, no sense, no logic. Kowalski pulled out his own compass. Same thing. The needle kept spinning, like the laws of physics didn't apply. "Here, this isn't right," Hawkins muttered under his breath. The jungle wasn't letting us leave. I looked up, desperate to find the sun through the thick canopy. But the shadows were everywhere. No way to tell east from west. It felt like time itself had stopped. "We're not lost," Hawkins finally said, his voice cold. "We're being led." Nobody wanted to hear that. And then, far off, deep in the trees, we heard it. Click, click, click. The sound came from one side, then the other, then behind us. "It's hurting us," Ramirez whispered, eyes wide. "Then let's see where it's taking us," Carter said, steady, and we kept walking. Not because we wanted to, but because deep down, we knew we didn't have a choice. I have no idea how long we walked. Hours, minutes. Time had lost all meaning. The jungle closed in around us like a living wall, suffocating. The heat, the sweat, the hunger, none of it mattered anymore. There was only that awful, undeniable feeling that we were being led somewhere. And then, we stopped. Not because we wanted to, because we couldn't go any further. The clearing was there, an open wound in the middle of the dense vegetation, as if something had ripped the trees out by their roots. The soil was dark, stained. Not with blood, but with something older, something deeper. A rotting, sour smell filled the air. A smell of something that shouldn't exist. And that's when we saw it. At first, I thought it was a reflection, a trick of the light filtering through the canopy. But no, it was real, a twisted silhouette, a shape that was barely there, like melted glass shimmering in the air. The space around it bent, like it was warping light in a way that shouldn't be possible. My chest locked up, my breath froze in my throat. The thing didn't move. It didn't need to. It was just watching, and then everything fell apart. I saw it. I saw my own death. Not a memory. Not an illusion. It was real. My body collapsed in the mud, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream. My arms twisted in an impossible way. My blood soaking the ground. I blinked and the vision was gone. But the fear stayed. The screaming started. Ramirez fell to his knees, whispering something incoherent, his eyes wide, empty, like his soul had been ripped from his body. Kowalski staggered back, his face pale as death, clutching his rifle like a useless piece of wood. Thompson just shook uncontrollably, and Hawkins didn't say a word. He just stared, eyes glazed over. No panic, just acceptance. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shut my eyes. I wanted to forget, but I couldn't, because I knew it was true. The thing wasn't just showing us a possibility, it was showing us what was coming. My body wanted to run, my mind wanted to collapse. Carter was the only one who reacted. "Look down," he shouted. "Don't look at it." I squeezed my eyes shut. I could hear my ragged breathing, my heart slamming in my chest. The sound of the jungle was gone, a void. When I finally gathered the courage to look again, it was gone. The space where it had been was empty. But something inside me knew it didn't need to be there anymore, because now it was already inside our heads. Carter was the first to react. "Run!" We didn't hesitate. The trees blurred past us as we tore through the jungle. My heart pounded so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My breath came in short bursts, my rifle bouncing in my sweaty hands. The only thing that mattered was getting out of there. But where were we running to? Instinct took over, pushing us forward. But the jungle had no end. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow stretched, grew, ready to swallow us whole. And then I heard it. Click, 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 my body locked up. I knew I shouldn't look, but I did, and it was there. Too close, it didn't move, it didn't attack. It just let us run. Then, Hawkins shouted, "Wait!" I skidded to a stop, nearly falling backward. Ramirez slammed into me. Kowalski halted just in time. Only Carter kept running, stopping a few steps later when he realized we weren't following. "What the hell are you doing? We have to keep moving." Hawkins didn't answer right away. His chest rose and fell rapidly, but his eyes were locked on something beyond us. "Beyond the jungle. Something's wrong," he finally said. "Think about it, that thing had every chance to kill us at the camp, while we slept, when we were lost. But it didn't. It just watched." He looked at us, his voice shaking. "What if running is exactly what it wants?" Silence fell over us. I swallowed hard. My brain wanted to deny it, but every fiber of my body knew he was right. The creature wasn't hunting us. It didn't have to. It was making us destroy ourselves. Fear, paranoia, desperation. That's what it wanted, and we were playing right into its trap. "So what do we do?" Ramirez whispered. Hawkins wiped the sweat from his face, trying to steady himself. "We break the pattern. It wants us to run, then we don't." "That's insane," Kowalski muttered. Maybe it was, but did we have another choice? Carter looked around. His face was unreadable, but after a moment he sighed. "Fine, we stop. But if that thing takes a single step toward us, we run." No one argued, so we stood there and waited and waited. But the thing didn't move. We stood frozen as time dragged on. Sweat dripped down my face. My rifle felt heavier in my hands, and then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Or maybe it just decided to let us go. Carter broke the silence. "Move slowly, no running," and we did. This time without looking back. We walked, we didn't speak, we didn't run. We just kept moving, stepping carefully, like one wrong move could bring it back. Time stopped making sense. The sun filtered through the treetops in soft, broken beams, but I couldn't tell if it was morning, afternoon, or something in between. And then, we heard it. Water. The sound of a river flowing. And there it was, a long silver scar cutting through the suffocating jungle. The Mekong River. Our way out. Kowalski collapsed to his knees in the mud. Ramirez muttered something under his breath, maybe a prayer. Thompson just stared at the water like he couldn't believe it was real. Carter grabbed the emergency radio. The sound of static was the most real thing we had heard all day. Python team, requesting extraction, coordinates. He gave our location. The response came quickly. A helicopter was on its way, but even knowing we were leaving, no one celebrated. Because deep down, we all felt the same thing. We didn't escape. We were allowed to leave. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. The rotors kicked up a storm of dust and leaves. The doors slammed open. Hands pulled us inside. Orders were shouted. The deafening roar of the blades filled the cabin, and we just sat there, silent, unmoving. The pilot asked what happened. Carter gave the only answer he could. Hostile zone, Viet Cong, ambush, lost the chopper. We made it out. The pilot accepted it. No one asked anything else. We lifted off, and from up there, looking through the open door, I watched the jungle shrink beneath us, an endless, untouched green stretching in every direction. Like nothing had ever happened. But we knew the truth. The mission was buried. No mention of enemy forces. No mention of impossible footprints. No mention of the thing that watched us without ever needing to attack. Each of us was transferred. Some went back for new missions. Others, like me, went home. But one thing connected us all. We never spoke about it again. Not because we didn't want to, but because deep down, We knew no one would believe us. Years later, I still dream about that night. I still see the invisible shadow in the jungle. I still hear that metallic sound echoing between the trees, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch my own reflection in the mirror and notice something strange, something small. A slight shimmer in the image, like the light is bending, distorting around me. Like I never really left. The Vietnam War was not just a battlefield between armies. It was a war between the rational and the unexplainable. Amid elite military operations, battalions of highly trained soldiers, and the dense jungle filled with natural dangers, something else seemed to lurk in the darkness. Was it just paranoia, a product of extreme combat stress? Or was something truly unknown hunting those who dared to step into forbidden territory? Stories like this make us question what really happened in the Vietnamese jungle. How many other accounts were buried, dismissed out of fear of ridicule? How many soldiers took these secrets to their graves, never daring to share what they had truly seen? If you enjoyed this chilling story and want to hear more paranormal and unexplained military encounters, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Leave a like. It helps us keep bringing you more content like this. And share this with your friends who love mysteries and the supernatural. And of course, keep watching. We have many other dark stories that will challenge your perception of reality. The unknown is everywhere, and maybe closer than we think. See you in the next video.